Hello there, people of the internet. I was asked to talk about what you should know if you own an AK-47, and this is going to be from the perspective of the United States, so if you're other places in the world, maybe your mileage may vary. So what to know about owning an AK-47, and I think I got a pretty good list of things that you should probably pay attention to. So here in the United States, the AK, it's a capable platform, and it's definitely enough of a platform's capabilities for what most people would need a rifle to do. However, by a pretty huge margin, the AR in 223-556 dominates the market. So if you just want as cheap of a rifle as possible with getting as much capability as possible, go out and get yourself an entry-level AR. Now with the AK, there's a couple of things that we gotta pay attention to whenever it comes to getting yourself an AK. I'm going to go ahead and start off by saying we're going to be talking about 7.62x39 AKs because those are by far the most predominant here in the United States. But with what we're discussing, a lot of it translates over to 5.56 and 5.45 AKs as well. So 7.62x39, that is way more often than not going to be a 123 grain bullet moving at about 2,400 feet per second, depends on brand and whatnot. They're more often than not going to be some kind of steel case round like what I got right here, and they're going to use a bimetal jacket. The bimetal jacket is a steel jacket over, more often than not, a lead core round. You might find some steel core rounds, those are a lot less common, but more often than not, it's a lead core round. That steel jacket is a lot harder than a copper jacket. It's going to wear out your rifling a lot faster. However, that being said, 7.62x39 still does not wear out rifling all that quickly. As a matter of fact, even with this cheapo steel case ammo, you can shove probably about 30,000 rounds through your rifle before you start to see any real issues with accuracy from worn out rifling. The issues in accuracy you will see is from that hard jacket. It just lends itself to being quite inaccurate. We're talking probably about 6-inch groups at 100 yards. Most people can't shoot that well anyway, so if you're of the opinion to where that is good enough accuracy for you, then by all means you go ahead and use what kind of ammo it is that you want to use. Barnaul ammunition is a popular steel case round that lends itself to being pretty good in terms of accuracy. That is the only steel case round of 7.62x39 that I would recommend if you're looking specifically for accuracy. But most of the time, if somebody's going out to getting AK, they're getting it for defensive purposes, in which case, you know, 6 MOA accuracy is more than capable for handling most of what a civilian here in the United States would need to handle, or we're just mag dumping into garbage, in which case it doesn't even matter if the rounds are tumbling. We're still having a good time. So let me cover the manual of operations real quick. AK mags, they're a little bit more difficult to insert into your rifle than, say, your AR mags. They got a little lip right here, and they're a rock and lock style magazine. Take your magazine, insert it lip first, front first, into your magazine well, and then you kind of rock your rear of the magazine into your magazine catch. It's this little paddle thing that we have right here on the front of the trigger guard. And then your magazine is locked in place. Maybe give it a little shake, little tug. Don't play with it too much now. But you just want to make sure that it is locked in place. And then to pull the magazine out, you depress that little paddle in front of your trigger guard, and then the magazine comes right out. Now, there's different kinds of magazines out there, different capacities. This right here is a standard capacity magazine, 29 rounds for YouTube purposes. And this right here is actually a 10-round magazine. There's like 5-round magazines out there for hunting purposes as well, if you have some legalities in your particular local area. A lot of your AKs are going to have this right here on the side of the receiver. This right here is a rail mount system for mounting optics or scopes to your AK. Most people don't use that. If you are using that, then you're definitely not among the normal, because the normals tend to just use the iron sights on the AKs. Now with your iron sights, this particular one is windage adjustable, but most of them are not. Your windage adjustment is done from your front sight. Most of the time, people are going to notice that their front sight is canted pretty far left or right, and that's just because of the AK's manufacturing process. It has to be canted one way or the other pretty extreme, unless we're talking about a really, really, really top-notch, high-quality AK. But if you have an AK that's been zeroed from the factory and you see your front sight is like really far off left or right, as long as you're still making hits on target, then that's not going to matter. As a matter of fact, that's a pretty common Russian staple. Just in general, if we have a look at my M44 right here, I'm not sure how well this is going to pop up on camera, but you can see my front sight on this thing. If it pops up on camera, you can see how off center this thing is, and that's common to zero your rifle if your front sight is what zeros windage. So don't freak out if you see a canted front sight. Alright, once your magazine is inserted, I went ahead and pulled the magazine out just for safety purposes, even though it's an empty magazine. Right, here's your charging handle. Your charging handle, as you pull it back, it cocks the hammer inside of the rifle, which we'll look at here in a second. But whenever it goes forward, the bolt pulls, I'm trying to explain this as simply as possible so people can understand. The bolt pulls a round from the magazine and inserts it into the chamber. I would recommend getting yourself a set of go and no-go gauges, which lets you test the headspace for your AK, especially if you're getting a cheap AK, because cheap AKs tend to have cast trunnions, and we'll talk more about that in a little while, whenever we talk about barrel walk and cast trunnions and some of the issues that you might come across. So in terms of the actual manual of arms, right, here's your charging handle. Pull it back. That actually cocks the rifle as it goes forward, which is under spring tension. You don't actually have to let it ride forward. You just let go of it and the spring pushes it forward. Strips around, sticks it into the chamber. If you have a properly headspace AK, then you are pretty much ready to go. So pull the trigger. Most of us in the US, we have semi-auto AKs. You got to pull the trigger every time you want the rifle to go bang. This right here is a safety on the rifle. All the way down is fire. All the way up is safe. You know it's on safe because you can't pull your charging handle back because the safety gets in the way. So you can't actually load your rifle, which is one of the things that I don't like, because to unload your rifle, you got to have the rifle off of safe, which I really don't like. The safety also serves as a dust cover. If you look right here on the back of the receiver, you see this big old hole right there that allows dirt and funk and whatnot to get into the fire control group, which we'll have a look at here in a second. You don't want to leave that open, especially if you're out in the field doing whatever it is that you're doing. So safety on, that covers the hole and protects the guts of the rifle. So that's pretty much all of the basics of what to look for if you're looking to use an AK. Whenever you're out looking to buy an AK, first thing you want to do is look down the sights and the barrel and make sure that the rifle's actually straight. Whenever it comes to AKs, I have seen bent AKs on more than one occasion. They're normally used, but just make sure that your rifle is straight. And if you see a rifle that's tilted one way or the other, normally that's the result of a stamped sheet metal receiver, which is normal and very common for AKs. That's not a bad thing. But sometimes if they get a little bit of an impact or something on them, maybe ran over by something, you might see something concaved one way or the other. You're going to have a look at all the little rivets and whatnot on the outside of the AK. That's these little button-looking things on the outside of the AK. Just look at them and make sure they're flat and firmly against the receiver. You don't want to look at them and see any space or air gap underneath them. That would definitely not be a good way to go. Take a look at your hopefully this comes up on camera. Take a look at your rivets that are down here by your magazine catch and make sure that those are also nice and settled. And for the most part with this Romanian AK, these actually look pretty gosh darn good. Alright, so your rifle is straight. Everything right here seems to be in order. Grab your charging handle, pull it back, and you're going to feel it catch on things multiple times. Run your charging handle nice and slow as it catches on things, and normally right about here. This right here is where it would normally catch on the hammer of the gun if the hammer is worn out on the gun and starting to mushroom. I have had several AKs that hang up right about here. That's not a feature. So if the AK does not push itself forward with its own spring tension, then that's probably not an AK that you want to get your hands on. So the front trunnion of the AK is oftentimes the weak spot of the AK because a lot of companies will make them cast. They'll just cast out the front trunnion, and casting has a lot of imperfections. What that is you're literally just pouring molten metal into a mold to make whatever piece it is that you're looking to make. And you can have like air bubbles and gaps and cracks and all sorts of stuff inside that. What the front trunnion is that is where the bolt locks into to seal the round inside the chamber, and that is where the gas pressures from the round going off actually are. So we have really, really, really high pressures from that detonating cartridge happening inside of a trunnion. You don't want cast trunnions because that is a really, really, really weak style of metal. You want to get yourself something that is, say, milled, like somebody took a physical solid block of metal and actually cut out the shape of the trunnion with a milling machine, or maybe something that is forged. You start off with your piece of metal, and essentially nowadays it's going to be machine done, but it is hammered into the spec of being a front trunnion. So avoid the cast ones, they're just not going to be all that great. Right here on the rear sight, a very, very common battle zero for your AK is actually going to be significantly higher than what most people would be using their rifle for. A battle zero, if you take your sight and you bring it all the way down, you'll see 100 yards, but then you'll see something underneath it, which this sight does not have because it's a windage adjustable sight. It's just a more modern sight. But most of your AKs, you're going to see almost, it looks like a little N, like a lowercase n. Not quite like that, but pretty gosh darn close. And that is a battle zero, and that battle zero is set for 300 yards. And the reason why that is if you aim at a target, a man-sized target within 300 yards, you're going to hit your marker, and most combat takes place within 300 yards. So that's kind of why they do that. Most of us, though, are shooting at garbage within 100 yards. So you just want to set your sight from that N to your 100-yard sight zero. This way your AK hits at point of aim. If your AK is still hitting high or low at that 100 yards, then you can adjust your front sights with a secondary tool that you can go out and get and find. You don't necessarily need it, but boy, it helps a lot. The front sight literally just like screws into your front sight block, and that front sight travels up and down as it screws. And so to adjust whether or not you're hitting high or low, you adjust your front sight elevation up or down, and then you leave it there based off of your ammunition type. Like if you're firing cheapo steel case ammo at 100 yards and you notice, hey, this is hitting really, really low, then you adjust your front sight accordingly until you're hitting at point of aim. And then you can adjust your rear sight like, oh, we're going to the gun range today and we're shooting at 300 yards. So now that my rifle is adjusted for 100 yards with this ammo, if I adjust it to 300 yards, and assuming you have proper in-spec 7.62x39, then it should hit your target at that 300 yard mark. Emphasis on should. Alright, let's go ahead and get into the internals of the rifle. There's more to cover, but for the most part, most people don't need to know all the little intricate things and whatnot. Like, most of us aren't going to worry about anything about the rear trunnion. We're not even going to bother taking that off the rifle. Most of us aren't going to worry about the barrel pin that holds in the barrel and the trunnion and all the little bits right here. That right there is a very common fail point with your AKs. If we have really, really cheap AKs, even ones that have cast trunnions, a lot of times the barrel pins will be a softer material than what is actually needed to retain that barrel. So after, say, 5,000 rounds, that barrel pin will start to bend or wear or whatnot, and that's what holds in the barrel. So as that thing wears out, the barrel starts moving forward. Your chamber starts opening up, you lose headspace. So that's definitely something to look out for, and that's one of the reasons why I recommend people go out of their way to get no-go gauges for their rifles, especially if they're using cheap rifles. So disassembly of your AK, there's a little button right back here. You press that in, and this piece right here comes off. This is just a dust cover. There's dust covers out there that have like Picatinny rail mounts and whatnot on them. Those are not great. They're not made to retain zero. They're made for just cool factor. If you want to use your AK for any real significant serious purposes, do not use a dust cover that has a rail mount on it and that's where you put your optic. That is not the way to go, just because of how these things seal onto the rifle. It's literally just held on with spring tension, and that dust cover just moves around too much for you to get a good adequate zero with your rifle. So right here we got a recoil spring that pushes forward, pulls back, comes right out of the gun. These right here are very common to have rust on them up at the front of them. That's not going to hurt nothing. There just sits in the bolt carrier group. Bolt carrier group right here pulls back, pick it up right out of the gun, and we can see our piston attached to the bolt carrier. And right here is our bolt attached to the bolt carrier. The bolt carrier is what actually slides back and forth on the AK, and this right here just pulls right out. So if your bolt comes out, don't go thinking that you have a broken gun. If you have headspace issues with your rifle, and it is a rifle that you have not fired a bunch, I recommend getting yourself a new bolt, because a lot of your modern bolts, especially for your dirt cheap AKs, they're made out of spec. And they're made within spec of what the factory calls for. But whenever you have things that are made to really, really, really high tolerances, and sometimes they just don't add up very well, go out and get yourself a good, decent quality bolt, and then still see if you're having headspace issues, because I have seen bolts for cheap AKs be the problem, as opposed to trunnion issues or barrel issues or anything like that. So if you're having bolt issues, try that. If you have issues where your firing pin keeps falling out of your bolts, have a look at your firing pin retaining pin, punch that bad boy out, and look at it. It's supposed to be completely round, like a pencil, like a complete cylinder. If you see an arch inside of it that's been like carved out, that means that that arch is where the firing pin is being pushed through under fire, and that's why it's falling out. And that's another really common occurrence with cheap AKs. So your bolt comes right out of the gun, just like that. After you get all your rearward bits out of the gun, then you can move this little lever right here. Most AKs, you just kind of pull this up, and it allows you to be able to pull out your gas tube. This right here is important if you're firing corrosive ammo. Most of your modern ammo is not corrosive, but you might come across some that is corrosive. This way you can clean out your gas tube. This doesn't really serve very many purposes. After that, we have access to the internals of our gas block, so we can go ahead and clean that out as well. The AK has a 1 and 9.5 twist inside of it, and what that essentially translates to is it can stabilize a good variety of different bullets. However, mostly you're going to find 123 grain bullets, somewhere around that ballpark, and the heaviest you're going to find is probably going to be about 150 grain. So even though the AK has the twist rate to be able to stabilize a good number of other projectiles, there's just not a whole lot of options out you. So unless you're a hand loader that hand loads your own particular projectiles for the AK, you're pretty much just stuck with those numbers. However, with a 1 and 9.5 twist, you can stabilize like all the way up to 200 grain projectiles. The issue is you might not get the velocity necessary to be able to stabilize that. So if you're a really skilled hand loader and can figure out what kind of powder is necessary to make that happen, then by all means you go ahead and you do that. So now our AK is completely broken down. We reassemble it exactly the same way that we took it apart. Right here is the hammer that I was talking about earlier. That impacts the back of the bolt and hits the firing pin and sets off the cartridge. Whenever you pull the trigger, this bad boy comes flying up, and the bolt is normally sitting right here whenever the gun's all closed up and whatnot. And as this right here flies up, it smacks the firing pin and sets off the cartridge. So that's pretty simple, easy, not complex at all. But you gotta look at these things, because in your cheap AKs, those mushroom, and if they mushroom too far out of spec, they'll start missing the firing pin or not hitting it hard enough to be able to set off the primers properly of your 7.62x39. And whenever that starts to happen, you gotta replace your hammer, and that's not necessarily that difficult of a process, but there's a lot of springs and whatnot in there. It's just not something that I would necessarily want to focus on, especially if we're talking about somebody who doesn't necessarily know enough about guns to require a video like this. So whenever you're putting your bolt back into your AK, you literally just kind of set it back into the bolt carrier group, and then you spin it until it stops letting you pull it forward and pull it out. And that there means the bolt is back in the place that it is supposed to be. So we're going to start off by putting this thing back on the AK, simply because if we do not, then we can't fit it back on, because the piston will be in the way. So put that there, piston back into the AK. Recoil spring goes back in the same exact way that it came out. You don't need the dust cover. You can actually go out and shoot your AK just like this. But we're still going to put on our dust cover because we don't want any of our internals to be subjected to any nonsense on the outside of the rifle. When putting on your dust cover, it can be a little bit difficult. Don't be afraid to like smack it on there. It's an AK, it'll be fine. You're not going to have any issues. Whenever it comes to the public perception of the AK, if we're talking about normal people, they see this as the bad guy gun. So if you're in a situation where you have to use your AK to defend yourself, it would be a really, really good option for that. However, once you get to a courtroom, the jury looking at that AK, they might decide to themselves that, well, they might develop a little bit of bias towards you. I have seen that happen more than once. So just bear that in mind, that the firearm that you decide to use absolutely impacts what a jury is going to say about you, and the AK is the bad guy gun. So keep that one in mind as well. Now 7.62x39 is one of those cartridges where it works really, really well out of a shorter barrel just because of how fast the powder burns and how fast the pressure curves achieve its peak pressure in terms of pushing that bullet out. So a lot of the times you don't need a long barrel longing AK. This one right here is just your standard 16-inch because that's what legally we have to have here in the United States, unless we want to worry about like NFA paperwork and whatnot. But if you go out and you get yourself an AK pistol, those are significantly more capable than like a 5.56 pistol, because 5.56 requires long barrel length to achieve the necessary velocities that it needs to achieve in order to be as powerful as it needs to be. 7.62x39 just does not have those kinds of hindrances. Magazines for the AK, these are extraordinarily available. There's steel mags out there, there's polymer mags out there, there's probably some other kinds of mags out there, but steel and polymer are probably going to be your most common. There's surplus mags out there that you can go out and get for dirt cheap, but there's a ton of stuff available on the commercial market that you can go out and get for dirt cheap as well. If you have an AK and it's a Yugoslavian M70, then keep in mind that the wooden furniture on the M70 is different than all of the other AKs out there. I don't know why they did that, but that's the route that they decided to go. So getting normal AK furniture to put onto a Yugoslavian M70 or pretty much any Yugoslavian AK variant, it's just not going to work, because for some reason they decided to go ahead and go a different route with different specs. So I think that's pretty much everything that I have to cover about the AK. I can't think of anything else. So there we go. That's basically everything. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below is a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off. Have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.